When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast. Thank you for tuning into episode 10 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snelling's Law. I am your host, Scott Snellings. Today, we're going to be speaking with a franchise consultant, podcaster, survivor, and networker extraordinaire. I first met Roxanne at a Provisors networking event. She introduced herself as a matchmaker. She matched up people looking for franchises with a franchise that met their goals, and I had no idea there was anything out there like this. So it sounded fantastic. As I got to know Roxanne further, she has a great story. So I'm glad that I was able to drag her into the studio today, and I almost literally had to drag her into the studio because she's usually the one asking questions on her very own podcast, The Unpredicted Entrepreneur. So Roxanne Rapske, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Wow, thank you. That was quite the introduction. And it is weird to be sitting on this side, so here we are.
All right, well, if you feel like asking questions, I will cut you off because this is my show and I get to ask the questions today.
All due respect.
All right, so now you are one of our famous California transplants. Here to the great state of Texas.
Yes.
So tell us about growing up. Where'd you grow up in California? Or did you grow up in California?
I did. So I was born in a Whittier hospital, and I grew up in this little town, Whittier. It's in Los Angeles County, California. I went to Whittier High School, so there's a very Whittier theme there. And then as I graduated, I went off to Pepperdine, lived in Malibu for a while, and then I started migrating south. So south to Orange County, south to San Diego County, where I spent the last about 20 years before we moved here.
Fantastic. So as you matriculated down the coast of California, what was growing up in California like?
Wow, it was a long time ago. So I will tell you that the beach was always accessible, and I did get in trouble for ditching school and going to the beach. Huntington
It's kind of a rite of
Beach.
passage for any Californian, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, you take it for granted. We actually just went back to visit last Christmas, and we got there, and I kept telling my husband, I'm like, God, it's beautiful here. You know, you really take it for granted when it's just at your disposal. And you have the mountains too. So you go to the mountains and ski, you go to the ocean. And, you know, I never really got into surfing, much to my husband's chagrin. But I did do some body surfing and really just took it for granted, I guess.
Well, but now here in Texas, you have access to Galveston and Port Aransas and...
I've been warned.
Why are you laughing?
I've been warned about Galveston.
Well, we love our beaches here in Texas. Maybe it's because we don't know any better, but we go down to Port Aransas every year, me and the family, and the kids love it.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. You're probably going to be underwhelmed coming from California, but hey, it's all we have here. So all right. So growing up, did you have any career ambitions?
You know, it's funny because you're digging into things that I don't like to talk about, actually. We didn't talk about this when you were prepping me. So I always joke and say we put the fun in dysfunctional, but it really wasn't fun at all. So I grew up in an alcoholic, broken family. And my real ambitions were that I knew I didn't want to live like my parents lived. So I grew up in Alateen, and gosh, nobody really knows this. And
I certainly didn't.
No, yeah. So many of those folks I thought were future alcoholics in the making, you know, so it really wasn't a place for me. And I don't even really like calling him my stepdad because he really wasn't that, but he used to always tell me, you're going to be just like me. You're going to be just like me. And you can imagine the expletives that would go through my head as he said that. And I just knew there wasn't any way that I was going to be like him. And thank God for the counselors at school that took the time to take me in and work with me, because without them, I wouldn't have gotten into Pepperdine. It was really our church that I went to in my youth group, and the counselors at school that helped me. I got in on a full ride. It was all grants and scholarships, and without their help, that would have never happened. So I just knew I wanted to live a better and different life than how I was raised.
Wow, that's amazing. There's kind of a common theme that's starting to develop as I interview different people on this podcast, and many of them have had either very different or difficult childhoods, and that's almost something that defines them from the outset. It's either a chip on the shoulder or it's this disciplined approach that comes from I will not be X or I will be Y. And so that is incredibly interesting. Is that something that continues to drive you to this day?
I'm very driven, and I think that plays a huge part in it because, and you'll notice the theme as we continue this interview, but, I always tell people when you start a business, the idea of starting a business is romantic, right? But it's certainly not for everybody. And quite frankly, most people don't have what it takes.
Right.
You really have to have grit. And you know this because you own your own business. But, and I think a lot of what was instilled in me, that fighter attitude, is what drives me today. The other thing that I knew watching my parents was I never wanted to be dependent on anyone. So I've always worked. I've always supported myself, even when I had the option of staying home. I've always been an earner. I started working when I was 13 under the table just to make money, to have money for school clothes and things that my parents couldn't provide. So I've always earned. I've always supported myself. I've always contributed to our family, and I'll do that. I'll continue to do that as long as I'm able.
And so you mentioned that there were kind of the whole area that you grew up in was the same type of people, dysfunctional families, alcoholics, things like that. Certainly there were other kids around. Certainly there were other kids that fell into that lifestyle too. Looking back, what do you think about you? What do you think it was about you that instilled that grit? Is it something you were born with, or is it something that you were able to develop looking back?
I had to be a fighter to survive the environment I was in. The abuser in our house was very violent. When he was drunk. So I watched a lot of violence, and I actually had some violent attributes because of that. And interestingly enough, I never wanted to be a parent because I was afraid I would be an abusive parent. So I didn't become a parent until I was in my 30s, and I spent most of my 20s in counseling because I knew I needed help to have a normal relationship because it's interesting how we all tend to go to our comfort zone. Even though it's completely dysfunctional, we'll do that because that's comfortable to us. And I knew that I had to break that mold, but I'm not going to take all the credit because I believe that there was divine intervention. I really feel like God reached down one day and he picked me up from this spot, and he picked me up and he put me over here, and he said, okay, go and flourish. So I believe there was divine intervention as well.
Well, let's talk about counseling for a second. You deal with a whole bunch of successful people, right? You deal with people who are buying businesses. That is your job. A lot of people, especially in what we call the driven crowd, feel that it is a weakness to seek help. We can tend to be isolationist. We take it all upon our own shoulders. We don't reach out for help because, quite frankly, people depend on us. What would you say to those people?
I think being vulnerable is scary, and I also think being vulnerable shows incredible strength because you're facing what you fear the most, which is you view that as weakness, but it behooves you to be self-aware and understand what your weaknesses are and to work on those weaknesses. We can all be better at what we do every single day, and we're never there. We're never finished. We're always a work in progress.
Preach it. Preach it. It's amazing how much our ego prevents us from growth. because that's all it is, right? The thing that's holding us back from being vulnerable, for asking for help, is that ego. We don't want other people to know what we're feeling inside. We don't want other people to know our insecurities. We don't want other people to know our weaknesses. And so to be able to do that, when I see someone come on the show and immediately be vulnerable, right? I had no idea what your background was. You could have very easily skirted that, but you didn't. You sat here and you opened up. That to me is one of the highest forms of strength that any human can possess, because it shows that you're confident enough in yourself to be able to put that ego aside and to open up to others. And I think as either a business owner or a leader of any kind, being able to have that trait to, obviously, you can't go too far with it, but have the trait of being able to set that ego aside and lead from a place of vulnerability, I think is just an amazing, amazing trait to have.
It's interesting because I always, as I was, working my way up the corporate ladder, I always held the highest respect for the leaders in the different companies I worked for that would roll their sleeves up and get down and roll around in the mud with us when we needed them to, versus the ones that would sit back and say, I've had people this is back in my mortgage banking days, throw 2 rate sheets on my desk and say, can you make a copy of that and punch holes in one for me? Really? You don't have a 2-hole punch? Like just little things. Or, even in my bartending days, I remember, when you're behind the bar and all the servers are ordering, you've got this little printer and these tickets, like my tickets would be on the ground. I'd be dripping sweat.
Yeah, and everything's wet, right?
Yeah, and the manager would be standing there going, can you move those newspapers off the bar? I'm like, really? Yeah, so.
Yes, you learn, sometimes you learn good leadership from being under bad leadership, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's certain things I think we all take. If you end up in a leadership position, you say, I will never, ever do that to someone or be that kind of a boss or leader.
Yes.
All right, so you mentioned your career in the mortgage banking business. Let's go through your career. How'd you start out?
Well, I had an office job, and I had a really good friend who's still a friend today. She always says she was almost, how does she say it? She was almost the mother. She was almost the grandmother of my children, or something like that, because I dated her stepson.
Gotcha.
So this is back in my 20s. So I was working at a refrigeration company, and she knew somebody that had gotten into loan processing and that was making bank, basically. And she really encouraged me to go to loan processing school. So I did. Went to loan processing school.
I didn't even know there was a school for loan processing.
At the time there was.
Okay.
It was just like a little certificate. And I got my first job. I'm going to forget the name of the bank now because they're no longer around. But I was a receptionist slash assistant processor. And it was back in the day when everything was paper. The files were this thick. I've got scars on my hands from those big binder things that you poke yourself with. But yeah, that was my start in mortgage banking. And I think that was 1988, I want to say, 87, 88. And worked my way I processed, then I underwrote, then I became a team manager, and then an ops manager. And then I walked away from that secure salary and went out into the field and went into sales. And about a year and a half into that, that's when everything kind of came crumbling down and the markets imploded. And I, along with about 3.5 million other people, lost our jobs. And
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit and talk about that decision to go from that nice, comfy salary and bonuses, I'm sure, on top of that. And you knew what was coming in the bank account every 1st and 15th or however often you were paid. Saying, you know what, you can have that. I'm going to go out here where I'm pretty sure I can do better, but not 100% sure. Tell us about that thought process and what drove you to do that.
I saw how much money they were making, and it drove me crazy that I would not leave the security of where I was and do that. But to do that, you had to give up that salary. And, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I always say to my clients that it's so much easier for someone in sales that has worked on commission to make that move to franchise ownership or business ownership than it is from someone that has always had that fat salary. It's just such a tremendous change. And you have to be confident in your abilities. And even though you're confident in your abilities, that fear's still there. But I just knew I wanted something else. We had 2 very strong incomes in the house. And I always also say that there's no better time to start a business than when there's another income in the house.
Absolutely.
If you can do it that way, that's the best way to do it. So I just, my husband support, we talked about it, and I took the plunge and had a really great run before it all started going sideways.
So a year and a half worth of a run. And so my understanding is it was kind of an overnight deal.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So, there's some terms that I don't know if your listeners are going to know, but at the time there were subprime loans, dirty loans, liar loans, basically. If you ever watched that
I've never
movie,
heard them called dirty loans.
They're dirty. They were dirty. And if you watch the movie The Big Short, it really explains what was happening behind the scenes at this time. So the feds had already put the kibosh on subprime, and then what we had was alternative A and then A product. And A product was like, you hear terms like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right.
So that was your A paper. And then there was this alternative A that just became like lipstick on the pig. It was still kind of subprimey, and we just put a little bit of lipstick on it and dressed it up a little, and it was still a liar loan, basically, just a higher level liar loan. And the other thing that was happening is there was a lot of fraud coming in. So I was on the wholesale side, so I wasn't dealing with the borrowers. There were the brokers that dealt with the borrowers that submitted those loans to us. And there were false documents coming in that they were helping to falsify, like verifications of deposit, bank statements even that had been altered. There was a lot of fraud going on. So anyway, I went to bed one night with $10 million in loans in my pipeline, and I woke up the next day with $400,000 left because the feds had now seized all the wires that were going out on what they called the alternative A product. And I just decided, that's it. I'm not going to try to trudge through this anymore. And my husband just said, he goes, we're not living like this anymore. My mom was living with us, helping us raise our son because we both worked so much. And, just the hamsters going as fast as we could on that little wheel. And he just said, we're not doing this anymore. He said, I don't care what you do. Stay home, volunteer, go back to school. I don't care what you do. Start a business. You just figure it out. And so I figured it out, and I took the most risky, hardest, scariest route. But I'm very grateful that I had his support. And I always say that I feel like he believed in me at the time more than I believed in myself, because I was pretty scared.
It is an absolutely huge decision to make, right? Mm-hmm. And having someone there to support you in that decision and believe in you and hold you up, and especially somebody who's not in it right there with you, right? He wasn't in your day-to-day. But to have someone from the outside who can help with perspective, right? Because that's one of the first things to get lost is perspective. When you're in the trenches, you have no idea what's going on around you necessarily. But having that is so hugely important. So let's talk about the hamster wheel. You deal with people who want to get off the hamster wheel every day. How did you end up on that wheel?
It just kind of happens. I remember the first time I was offered a role. I was with Washington Mutual at the time, and they wanted me to lead a team of about 20 people. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And I got the lecture from my husband. He says, you never turn anything down. You always say, I'll think about it. So, it's those golden handcuffs. They just keep throwing more money at you, and it's hard to say no. And then, of course, we all want the growth, right? And as we've paid our dues and put in our time. So, yeah, it just kind of happened. And I remember when I left Washington Mutual, we were at 30 days in underwriting, 30 days to underwrite a loan. You would walk down the hall. We had all these file cabinets, and then on top of those file cabinets were files, stand-ups, full of file folders, and they would just have the dates on them. It's just walls and walls of loans. And we had done away, we were making people we weren't even doing 30-day rate locks because we couldn't get the loans underwritten in 30 days. So I think we had like mandatory 60-day rate locks at the minimum. So it was just crazy. I've been at my desk at 5 a.m. I've been at my desk at midnight. Thank God for my mom living with us and kind of being like our live-in nanny. But you just get stuck. And I admit that I don't know that I would have made the decision that I made had my hand not been forced. I had to make a change, but it was the biggest gift I was ever given. I just wasn't aware of it at the time.
And so for anyone who may be listening to this, I think this is a very, very common theme running through the entrepreneurial community is having your hand forced, right? Because to your previous point, we all love that comfort. Comfort is what we know. That by no means it's comfortable, given your history and the hours that a lot of people are putting in. And the problem is that you keep making more money, you keep getting promotions, you keep getting all of these different things, and then all of a sudden, you're at retirement age, and you look back and you haven't lived a life. You've just sat there and you've worked, and great, you're pretty high up in the organization, you have all this money stashed away, and you've given your life in exchange for it. And so, in the entrepreneurial community, typically there does seem to be that decision point. Something will happen. The gauntlet will be thrown down, and you're either going to be forced out of that hamster wheel, and you can either go jump into another one, or you can take a different route, or there's going to be some sort of decision point. And I would encourage everyone out there to look at their comfort and say, hold on, life is truly lived in the uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right? We always tell everybody who's joining our law firm, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I know it sounds paradoxical, but the more that you live in the uncomfortable, the more you're able to handle it. The more the heart rate doesn't go through the roof every time you're uncomfortable. And to me, that is something that I would encourage everyone, no matter what position it is, no matter if you have zero interest in being an entrepreneur or whatever, at least pick your head up and look around.
See what else is out there. Yeah. So by the way, that's one of my favorite sayings, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I've probably said it thousands of times. I think my colleague is sick of me saying it. She's like, can you stop saying that? But it's true. And growth doesn't happen in our comfort zone. If you're just comfortable, and sometimes our comfort zone is complete insanity. But once again, it's what we know. It's why people stay in abusive relationships, because it's what they know. And they're afraid of what else could be out there for them, even though it could be better. Sure, it could be worse, but it could also be way better.
Absolutely. And the hamster wheel starts turning faster and faster on you almost unknowingly, right? It's like somebody's on the treadmill and they start off at like a 3.0, and then 5 years down the road, they're running at a 9.5 and their heart rate's through the roof and they can barely keep up. But it happens so gradually that you don't realize it. And I forget who told me this, but they said, every 6 months to a year, just stop. Take some time, just carve it out of your schedule, and pick your head up and look around. Evaluate, hey, is what I'm doing fulfilling? Am I happy? Am I well-rounded? Am I growing? And if you are, fantastic. If you're not, at least consider, hey, do I need to make a change here?
Yeah.
Do I need to go talk to my boss? Do I need to talk to my family and say, hey, this isn't working. Let's figure out how we spend more time with the kids, how we spend more time with each other, whatever it is. Or if you're not growing spiritually, emotionally, figure out, hey, this needs to be important to me. How do we fix this?
I agree, and you're right. Take a breath, take a minute, and assess, because I was forced to assess. I was forced to decompress, and the one thing that this gave me was a whole new outlook and the ability to be present for my son more than I was. I was able to take him to school in the morning and pick him up after school. And, I could work from the sideline of the soccer field while he was practicing. And I was around to help with driver training, even though that was terrifying.
I'm going through that right now.
Oh, my God. And then I kept telling myself that all of the parents of me and all my friends survived this, so I had to be able to survive this, right? But, and I think that's a common theme with so many of our clients, that what drives them is their relationships with their families and or friends. And not only did it give me that ability, it gave me the ability to pay my mom back for all that she sacrificed for us, because as she got older and started failing, I had the flexibility. I mean, there's times I would talk to clients from her hospital room. You know, I was around for her. I was able to be there for her. I'm an only child, so it all fell on me. And I'm so grateful that I didn't have to ask permission or potentially lose a job because I had to be there for my mom. I was able to just shuffle it all and make it all happen because I controlled my schedule.
Wow. So you are out, what's the right word? The mortgage industry goes away, so you're essentially laid off.
Yeah.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. What's next?
What's next was I became a franchise consultant. So I went through the process that a lot of my clients go through. I got online and I started looking for franchises, and I love frozen yogurt. So I should own a frozen yogurt shop, right?
Right. Hey, I love this.
That makes complete sense.
I should clearly own one.
Right. So that is the process I followed, and the frozen yogurt place that I liked at the time wasn't awarding any new franchises to folks in California. If you were already a franchisee and knew their system, they would award to you, but they wouldn't award to somebody that was clueless like me. So then I went down this whole other rabbit hole on smoothies. And then it started dawning on, well, first of all, who knew a smoothie place was $400,000 to all in, right? Because your eyes start to open because you don't realize when something has brick and mortar, you need a lot of working capital to float that business until it starts to cash flow. Like, right, all these wheels are turning and I'm learning as I'm going. It's daunting because I'm trying to figure it out all by myself. And lo and behold, a friend of mine had sold two businesses and was also on the same path that I was looking for franchises. And she ended up falling into franchise consulting. So I had started looking about a year before this all kind of fell apart because I knew something bad was coming. I felt it. I sensed it. There was all this false equity. People were just constantly coming back for refinances and each year pulling more and more money out. You could see it on their credit report, right? So there's this false equity. Property values are inflated fakely. And people are buying boats, they're taking vacations, they're buying expensive cars, and it's all this equity that they're pulling out of their houses. So I had started looking. So by the time this all kind of crashed, I already had one little side hustle going. I was already looking into franchising, and her husband kept telling me, this friend of mine kept telling me, if Tammy can do this, you can do this, because she's a lot more introverted than I am. And I really wasn't that interested until she told me what her first commission check was. And I was like, wait a minute, what are you doing again? And so that's when the interest really started. So that's how I fell into it.
Fantastic. And so that's what you're doing these days.
Still doing it. Yep.
Still loving it.
Still loving it.
All right. So for all of those wannabe entrepreneurs out there, what are your top 3, 5, 10 suggestions for them? Either things to think about, things to avoid, you name it.
Honestly, this is probably my biased opinion, but I would say don't do it on your own. Using a consultant like myself, it doesn't cost you anything. So the way our business model is, we work just like an executive recruiter. So the franchise companies pay us to help them find the right fit for their concept. So we work with someone, we make a successful placement, we're compensated on the back end by the franchisor. So find someone local that's well networked in your community, that understands business, that you trust, and let them guide you and help you in this process. There's organizations like the Small Business Development Center, SCORE. There's a lot of resources out there. So at the very least, start with the Small Business Development Center. They're all, this all funnels down through the Small Business Administration, and your tax dollars pay for this. So a lot of what's available it's free or at very, very little cost. Hook in with a Small Business Development Center. They're all run through local community colleges, and just show up and start taking some of their classes. Even if you're not interested in franchising, you want to start your own independent business, go and talk to the people that have been there, done that. And everybody there has owned a business. And not only do you have these classes available to you, once you go through their process, you're able to consult with their consultants at no cost. They'll coach you.
And if there is one thing that I never realized until I started my own business, is everything that's involved.
Yes.
Right? I'm a lawyer. Hey, I'm going to start a law firm. I'm going to practice law. That is a very small percentage of what I do these
Yes.
days. And even at the very beginning, I mean, there's so many things that I just had zero idea about. I always tell people, if I knew what I know now back then, I never would have done this. I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. Thankfully, I was naive and I just jumped ship, left a great paying job to go start my own because, me and my buddy, I knew we could do better.
And you know what? God bless all the true entrepreneurs out there that do that, because without them, there would be no franchises, right? It's those folks that have that true spirit that create these amazing businesses that they develop over time that turn into franchises, right? Because systems get into place. But you're right. We don't know what we don't know. And a lot of those mistakes that we're going to make are very expensive. So by all means, reach out and get some coaching.
For sure. We call that tuition. Right. Anytime we screw something up, and there's some tuition that's a lot more expensive than others. But yeah, every mistake is to be learned from. But to your previous point, go learn from other people's mistakes. Right. If that's going to save you so much in tuition money, I got to tell you, learning from other people. And that's one of the things that I've found in the mastermind groups that I've joined. I always try to find groups and networking opportunities where I can go learn from people who know way more than me. And I can't tell you how much money that saved me, being able to bounce ideas off somebody. And they're like, no, that's terrible. That's a really bad idea. And here's why. Oh, okay. Well, I hadn't thought about it that way. But for the entrepreneur, to me, it seems like one of the things that a franchise would significantly help with is that learning curve,
Yes.
right? I mean, you have a system in place. You have marketing developed. You have operations. You have a starter book, right? You're not just sitting there looking at a blank piece of paper saying, okay, how do we get started? You have the steps, right? You pay for it, but at the same time, the chances of being successful, I would imagine, are significantly higher.
They are, and you're also, so you are mitigating risk because of all the only business that you can buy that does the kind of disclosure that franchising does, that's the only model that way. You get a big, huge franchise disclosure document that gives you way more information than you've probably ever read in a document about a business. And then on top of that, you get to speak to the franchisees that are in that system doing that joined on with that franchisor. That is valuable information. You can't do that with just any regular business. There's really no one to talk to besides the employees or the customers. And usually the seller doesn't want anyone knowing he or she is selling. So you can't do that. So it's that, and it's that playbook. Yes, you're paying a franchise fee for that, but you are paying to be able to use that logo and to be able to jump onto that branding and for the secret sauce and the recipe. And I always tell people, if you're not going to follow the recipe, don't join a franchise. Don't spend the money. The reason you join is to have that recipe. And they've been there, done that. And if you want to be successful, you need to follow that process.
Absolutely. And for those of us who think we can always improve upon things, that can be dangerous, right? Because all of a sudden, I'm going to short circuit this process because I think I can make this more efficient, and then things go haywire.
Yep.
There's a reason that those steps are in place, and there's a reason that this company is successful, whichever one it is, and that's because they follow this specific footprint.
Right.
Is it always the best way? Not necessarily, but it works.
Well, and the younger brands are more, so one of the things that we do is we call it an entrepreneur profile, and it's a tool that tells us about our clients. It basically gives us their entrepreneurial DNA, so to speak. And so, for instance, for me, my compliance level is average. I don't necessarily like being told what to do. So I'm in
I would have guessed that.
Yeah, I have an opinion. So I'm in an organization that allows flexibility, and we are always trying different things. And so, if you're going to sign up with, let's say, a McDonald's, it's cut and dry. You're going to do it their way or the highway. There's other brands that'll allow for a little bit more of that creativity. And so it just depends. And that's part of what we do in getting to know our clients is really wanting them to go into a system that they're going to be comfortable in. If you are a little bit entrepreneurial and want to have some impact on the system, there's ways for you to do that. And there's brands that have more wiggle room for that.
Awesome. All right. So there's another part of your story that is quite significant. So let's dive into that. Tell us about your diagnosis.
Yeah, well, talk about pivotal moments. So it was March 2019. I found out I had cancer, and life came to a screeching halt. I immediately went into the fetal position. I was a victim. I was scared, and it took me a minute to get out of the fetal position and to go from victim to warrior princess. And I have to give shout out to, first of all, it was a very difficult time because my mom was in memory care. She was well into dementia, so I never shared with her that I had cancer. My husband was already living here, and my son was in college. So I was at home alone, dealing with a brand new diagnosis, and I was scared. So to my friends that were there for me, you all know who you are, who embraced me, put your arms around me, and really held me up. I love you, and I thank you for it, and I will never forget it. I had a team around me that really lifted me up and supported me. And there were a few pivotal things that helped me learn. One of them was I have a friend, Lisa, who introduced me to a gal named Jenny Crane, who was kind of a health coach, who shared some things with me that her mom went through and gave me a lot of education. And then the next big help was my chiropractor, Dr. Kelly Gibson, who introduced me to a video series called Beyond Chemo. I was more afraid of chemo than I was, I think, of the cancer.
Sure.
So I learned that there were alternatives and that I didn't have to poison myself to get through this. So I was fortunate. I did it without chemo and without radiation. And I know that's not everybody's path, but that was my path. And I had an amazing naturopath, Dr. Douglas Estrada, who I feel like saved me. I had 2 quite large tumors. I had 2 kinds of cancer.
Oh my goodness.
So, and part of my woe is me and feeling sorry for myself is I really feel like something was missed because every year I went for my exams. And how did I go from 0 cancer to 2 different kinds of cancer with these 2 large tumors in 14 months? So we were able to shrink my tumors by half before I went into surgery. So I did a lot. I put myself through a lot treatment-wise, but it wasn't chemo. And once again, I think it's just divine intervention. It wasn't my time. We're all going to expire. And at first I thought that was it. You know, my number's up. This is my time, but it wasn't. And I guess I still have work here to do. And I am going to try to do that to the best of my ability until my time is up.
And that's a real life experience that, you know, it's easy to sit here at a table and talk about having grit and, you know, having courage and not being a victim right up until you get that phone call.
Yeah.
That, hey, you do have cancer, right? I was there with you. We thought my son may have had cancer.
Wow.
He was, I think, 2 years old at the time, and he had enlarged lymph nodes. They did a biopsy, and the doctor was like, it's pretty big what I pulled out. And it was the worst 3 days of my life. And, you know, given the opportunity, I would have been right there in the fetal position, you know, anything but this. Take me. Don't say my little boy.
Yeah.
And describe for us that transformation from woe is me, as you put it, victim, fetal position, to warrior princess.
So I spent an entire weekend watching this video series, hours and hours and hours of content. If there's anybody out there that knows anybody that has cancer, it's called Beyond Chemo. It's free. It's a video series. And there's naturopaths, there's nutritionists. The thing that impacted me the most was there are medical oncologists that spoke to this that had gone back to school and also gotten their naturopathic license because they saw what chemo was doing to their patients and they thought there was a better way. So they were and are still medical doctors, but they had a whole other side of education. So I had convinced myself that if I was going to do chemo, I was going to do low-dose chemo. There's something called low-dose chemo. And I won't get into all the details on how it works, but I just did a ton of research, and knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, I just came out of that weekend and I was like, you know what? I may go down, but I am not going down without a fight, and I'm going down on my own terms. And the thing that really, I already knew this, but it was screaming at me at this time that I changed my whole medical team over. And I think a lot of people just listen to their doctors. We have got to be present, and we have got to participate in our medical care. You have got to be your own advocate. Nobody knows your body like you do, and you've got to get involved. You've got to challenge doctors. They don't know you like you do. So find doctors that you can trust, that you have a relationship with. I think some of us might be a little bit in fear of doctors because they have all this medical education and we don't. But it's just like you interview someone for anything else, you need to interview your doctors, and you need a team around you that they're in that fight with you.
Absolutely. Just because someone has a medical degree does not mean that they're a good doctor. Same thing with lawyers, same thing with engineers.
Yes.
People are people, right? People make mistakes. Some people are better than others at their chosen path, period. That's all there is to it. So, I mean, around here we have Dr. Death, right? I don't know if you've heard that podcast.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I started watching that on TV, and I was blown. And that all happened, like you can almost throw a rock from my house and hit that where that all happened.
Yeah, right where I grew up. So that is just to go to show you that just because you have a medical degree does not mean that you know what you're doing. And to your other point too, doctors, especially the way our healthcare system works, right? Mm-hmm. They are trying to see as many patients as possible. Yeah. And sometimes things can get lost in translation. Maybe they don't hear something the way that you're intending them to hear it. Maybe they are having a bad day and they're just not 100% on. And it is up to you, the patient, to advocate for yourself. I didn't do that. I'm sitting here today, it'll be 5 years at the end of October with a kidney transplant because I didn't advocate for myself. And so I am the biggest proponent of advocating for yourself in not just the medical context, but obviously also the legal context. And it is just so hugely important because nobody's going to care about you as much as you care about you.
100%. And the other thing that I would say is take somebody with you. If you have a serious diagnosis, take somebody with you that cares about you as an extra set of ears and eyes. I had great story. Marcy Wilson, I'm going to name you by name. A friend's mom who became my surrogate mom during this time. She was there. She helped deliver my son. She's a retired labor and delivery nurse. I wasn't in her hospital, but she promised me she would come when my son was born, and she did. She went to all my appointments with me, and she had her own tablet with notes in it. She had her own questions. She was there to listen and dissect, and then we would download together on what she heard and what I heard. And I think it's really important to have somebody with you as well at these appointments because it's an overwhelming amount of information that's coming at you. And it's overwhelming because it's emotional. So you need somebody else that's objective involved, I believe.
100% agree. When you are the person in the hot seat, you may hear what's being said, but your mind is in a completely different location, right? Especially early on. We deal with this at our office. We have people come in who either they themselves who have been involved in an awful crash or some sort of incident, and they're injured, or they've just lost a loved one, or who knows what the circumstance is. I can tell that they're listening, but they don't know what I'm saying. They're not understanding. And so at that point, it's kind of, we have to back up. Hey, maybe we need to reschedule something, or we break it down, or we give them some time, or whatever the case may be. I don't think the large majority of doctors have that luxury, right? They have appointments scheduled every 15, 20 minutes, and they don't have that time to do that. And so having someone there to advocate for you who's not in the emotional throes that you're in at that point in time is so helpful, and I think so important. So you get the diagnosis, and you start going through your new treatment. Are you still in that treatment?
Well, I'm continuing treatment, so I'm cancer free. I went through 3 surgeries.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. So it changed my life in the sense that I was always super healthy, and I'm telling you, once I got diagnosed, all my friends that have known me my whole life are just like, oh my God, if it can happen to you, it can happen. I'm the ones that's always doing some kind of crazy cleanse or juicing. I was a marathoner. I lived a pretty, what you would call a healthy lifestyle. So everybody's running out now and getting mammograms, making sure they're not missing anything. But the biggest thing is I completely cut sugar out of my diet. Most doctors will tell you eat whatever you want when you have cancer. Sugar is a big no-no. Cancer literally feeds on sugar.
Right.
So I'm not ketogenic 100%, but I try to mostly be clean keto. And, there's dirty keto and there's clean keto. We won't get into that. But that's one of the things that I do. The other thing that I do is I still go and get IVs, regular IVs. I get nutritional IVs, and then I do high-dose vitamin C. So those are the biggest things that I do. I also do this special test, and it's out of Greece, so it's not cheap. But they do things in other countries that we don't do here. And it's a blood test where we count my circulating tumor cells. We all have circulating tumor cells. If our immune systems are working properly, which starts in our gut, by the way, so if you have gut problems, then chances are things are going to happen to your body that shouldn't happen because so much starts in our gut. But I have this test every 6 months that counts my circulating tumor cells, so we can kind of see where I'm at. And if that's a precursor, right? If those numbers are going up, then there's probably some activity somewhere. So I just want to stay on top of it. I don't ever want to be in a situation where I've got these huge tumors growing somewhere and it's news to me.
Once again, advocating for yourself. So I would be really interested to see what would happen to our health as Americans in general if we cut out sugar and if we cut out processed foods. You get rid of those 2 things, and you're probably going to be pretty healthy. Problem is those 2 things are very addictive, and it's hard to avoid them in our current Western diet.
No, they are addictive, and I think the food companies know what they're doing. And the craziest thing is I've always craved sugar. And then when I was a runner, I had to do the goose stuff, right? When you're running for 5 hours and you're not, you've got to supplement with something.
Right.
So once you get off the sugar, and it's horrible getting through it's called the keto flu. You want to die. I mean, that's how bad you feel. You're just like, I'm just going to go in bed and I'm going to sleep for 5 days until this passes. But once you get through that, it's amazing that craving just goes away. It's like it doesn't control you. You don't obsess about it. I work from home a lot. So, working from home, the cookies in the cabinet are calling your name. Why are they doing that? Luckily, my son's moved out, and there's nothing in the cabinets now. So.
There you go. You can cleanse the cabinets.
Yeah, you got to get it out of your cabinets. But yeah, it's just, going back to our comfort zone, right? It's uncomfortable making changes, but sometimes we have to.
It is. And I think the other thing that goes along with that, too, is discipline.
Yeah.
Right? Because, and you see this all the time with entrepreneurs, they're super motivated. Mm-hmm. They are fearless. They make the jump. That excitement takes them to a specific point. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And then the discipline has to take over or they're going to fail. 100% they will fail.
100%. And it's funny, quoting my 23-year-old son, who says, and I agree, it's interesting because, as we watch our kids grow up and they have their own insight, he says to me, Mom, I don't believe in motivation. It's all about discipline.
He's been reading Jocko Willink. Without a doubt, he's been reading Jocko Willink, and I agree. Motivation is fantastic, but as you know from a marathon runner, you did not want to get up and run 3-4 miles all the way up to 20-something miles while you were preparing for a marathon. Some days maybe, yeah, when you felt great, the weather was perfect, but that is not the majority. It's not even close to the majority. Mm-mm. The vast majority of it is a grind.
Yep.
Right? You're like, oh, I got to go get my miles in today. I really don't want to. Oh, I'm in mile 3 of 20. This really hurts. This is going to be awful. I just want to stop. No. It's that discipline. Yeah. And the way that you create that discipline is what's your why? Right? We discussed this with several other guests is what is your why? And that's the focus. If you're an entrepreneur, it's not, oh my gosh, I don't want to do these reports. I don't want to talk to these angry customers. I don't want to do X, Y, Z. It's, hey, I did this for a reason. And that reason is to support my families, to grow a business, whatever it is. But that's got to be the focus, right? It's for the marathoner, it's the finish line. Hey, just get through this mile. Ultimately, it's going to take us to the finish line.
It's funny. I always say that if your why isn't big enough, you'll never do this. You're always going to find a reason not to, because the why is absolutely 100% what drives you. It's
amazing how much and how often our minds sabotage us.
Oh yeah.
And that's the perfect example is running, right?
Yes.
The perfect example is running. If I could turn off my mind sabotage indicator, whatever it is, then I could run forever.
Right.
But unfortunately, I can't do that. And that's the biggest struggle. It's not physical, capable of running a distance. It's mental. And it's how do you get past those things? And so let me ask you this. As a marathon runner, what were your tricks? How did you do it?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because most people that don't know or understand do think it's all physical, and it's so much a mental game. I never signed up for anything to quit. So that is a lot of my mentality. And one of my favorite sayings that I would say over and over again, we have all these crazy sayings that you tell yourself when you're trying to get through the pain of it, right? There's a saying by Marines. I used to live very close to Camp Pendleton, and there's a saying that says, pain is the weakness leaving your body. Mm-hmm. That's one of them. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger is one of my favorite. I am woman, hear me roar.
Whatever works.
Whatever works. And one of my favorite is from just keep on swimming. For you Nemo fans, I would just say, just keep on stepping, just keep on taking another step. You will get there. So yeah, I cried in my first marathon. I cried. I kept running, but I was crying. Everything hurt. The only thing that didn't hurt when I was done were my hands. Everything else hurt.
Teeth.
Okay, not my teeth. But my neck, my shoulders, my back. Everything all the way down. Just horrible.
I stopped running for a long time. I did a half marathon and felt that way. And I was like, I don't want to do a marathon. If the half hurts this bad, I don't want to do a full one. Yeah. Fantastic. All right, well, we are almost out of time. So a quick couple of finisher questions. Favorite book?
One of my favorite books is by a little tiny book by Ogmandino called The Greatest Salesman in the World.
The greatest. What is it about that book you like?
It's the life of somebody that has nothing and what he does to become accomplished in his life.
Awesome. All right. Favorite podcast other than yours and other than mine?
I've been listening to a lot of Brené Brown lately.
Yeah, I've read her Daring Greatly a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Fantastic book. All right, what are you watching?
I don't watch much on TV. I'm waiting for the next Yellowstone to come out.
All right. I saw they just changed it. So it's going to be in 1920s, like 1923 or something like that.
Yes.
So you have it right in the roaring 20s. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Well, Roxanne, thank you so much. Name of your podcast is?
Unpredicted Entrepreneur.
And how often does that come out?
That comes out, we release one every 2 weeks. So we just released one last week. We'll be releasing one next week. And we film it right here where you're filming this.
All right.
And it's also on, it's on our YouTube channel. So it's got audio and visual, but you can also listen to it anywhere you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, Roxanne is very expressive. So I would advocate for you to watch it on YouTube. And it's a fantastic podcast. Lots of stuff that you can learn from other entrepreneurs, from people in the industry. You just had a business lawyer, Brandy McKay, on there talking about things that you don't want to screw up.
Yes.
And definitely check it out when you get a chance. So Roxanne, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Scott.